Amen. Appreciate Michael leading this crew as Jason is away this weekend. And so thank you all for leading this talented group of musicians that we're blessed to worship with and lead us each week. If you got a Bible, we're going to be over in James chapter 3, finishing up a series we've been in for the last several weeks, talking about relationships and different components that kind of exist within relationships, things like sin, things like identity and worship and service. Things today we're going to talk about our words, but as you turn to James chapter 3, let me tell you, if you took what I learned this week, if you took the average person's words that they spoke in a 12-month period, if you took the average number of words somebody spoke over a 12-month period and you placed them and you chronicled them within a book 800 pages long. So you grab a book, 800 pages, chronicle all your words, take up all the words you speak in a calendar year. For the average person, you would fill up 66 800-page books of the words you'll speak in just one calendar year. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. There's someone in my house where we would need more shelves, right? Like the library wouldn't contain what we've got, the words that are being spoken in our house. Or some of you may be thinking, man, I'm married to a person, I know a person, I work with a person who, man, they need very limited shelf space. It seems as if they never say hardly anything at all. But the average person would fill 66 books, 800 pages long, if we took just the words the average person spoke over a year. Now, what if you came in here and we had your books right up here, and we pulled book 24, and we turned to page 312, and we just started reading words that you have spoken over the calendar year? Probably be okay with that, sure, right? I'd be okay with the things that I've said, spoken for all to hear from the platform on a Sunday morning. Absolutely. I'm not sure I would be, but maybe you would be okay with that, because here's what we know. That it's very difficult for us to recognize oftentimes the damage, the good, or the damage that can come, the harm, or the good, the blessing that can come, both out of the words that you say. The words that you speak to others, the words that you speak to your children, the words that you speak to your spouse or your coworker or your friends, your relatives, your neighbors. The words that come out of your mouth have great potential to do really good, and they have potential to do some devastating harm. There is not a good relationship that exists on the planet that doesn't contain as a part of that relationship good communication. And there's not a bad relationship on the planet that doesn't have as a component somewhere in the demise of that relationship poor communication or hurtful communication. So we're going to dive into James chapter 3 as we try to tie a bow on this series that we've been in for several weeks, looking at the power of the words that we speak to one another. In James chapter 3, a familiar text, maybe you've read it many times, but he says this in verse 1. Not many should become teachers, my brothers, because you know that we will receive a stricter judgment. Now, what does he mean by that in verse 1? What James is trying to communicate to us in verse 1 is this reality, is that if you and I are teachers, then we will just naturally speak more words. That if you sit in front of a classroom, if you teach Passage kids, if you teach a missional community group, if I stand up here and I speak each week, that the more words give more opportunities for our words to be hurtful or our words to be wrong. And he's saying, hey, there's going to be more words that are spoken. And so it's not that the standard changes. If you're a teacher, you have a different standard by which you are judged than everyone else. Not that the standard shifts, but you have a stricter judgment merely because of, hey, the amount or the volume of words that you will say or communicate. Verse 2, for we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he's mature and able to control the whole body. So what James is doing is making a connection between the discipline that is connected to our words and the words that we use, and the discipline that relates to all of life. If we see someone undisciplined in the things that he says, it's likely that he's undisciplined in other areas of life as well. But if you find someone who is disciplined in their words, then maybe there's a discipline that exists in other areas as well. He says, if anyone does not stumble, He says he is mature and able to control his whole body. Now, if we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we direct their whole bodies. And consider ships. Though very large and driven by fierce winds, they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So too, though the tongue is a small part of the body, it boasts great things. Consider how a small fire is set ablaze a large forest, and a tongue is a fire. The tongue, a world of unrighteousness, is placed among our members. It stains the whole body and sets the course of life on fire, and itself is set on fire by hell. Now, if there's ever a point in the book of James you think, whoa, I think you might go a little bit overboard, James. Like, look at all that he said about the tongue. It sets the course of our life on fire. It sets the course of our life, and those who are on the path of our life, also the potential to set on fire. And he continues on in verse 7, every kind of animal, bird, reptile, and fish is tamed and has been tamed by humankind. But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. With the tongue we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in God's likeness. Blessing and cursing out of the same mouth? My brothers and sisters, these things should not be this way. Does a spring pour out sweet and bitter water from the same opening? Can a fig tree produce olives? My brothers and sisters, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a saltwater spring yield fresh water. So as we walk through the power of the words that we have and the purposes of our words, I want us to give consideration, specific consideration, to the relationships that we are in. And as we try to make application of this text, that we consider those who we are speaking with the most, or maybe whom God has placed us and given us the most opportunity to reach. In the words that you say, in the things that you say, coupled with the things that you do, what's James trying to communicate to us? I think there's a few things he wants us to recognize. The first is this. He wants to recognize the potential power of our words. The potential power of our words. Every time you open your mouth, you have the potential to sin. Every time you open your mouth, you have the potential to sin. There are some times that sin is predicated on where you are or what you are doing or the circumstances of which you currently find yourself. But no, not with the mouth. The mouth, and no matter where you are, no matter who you're around, no matter what you're doing, you have the potential to sin just by opening your mouth and the things that come out of it. It has great potential. Great potential for power out of the words that you speak. It is very small, but it has great impact. And he tries to explain this to us and give us three examples to help us get our minds around this. And he gives us three things. He tells us about the bit in the mouth of a horse, the rudder on a ship, and a small spark that sets ablaze a whole fire. Let's walk through these and think about these just for a moment. I grew up in a town just a little bit north of Louisville, Kentucky. Luckily on the Indiana side, and I was about 15 minutes away from a place called Churchill Downs. One of the most famous horse races in the world takes place there every year in the first Saturday in May. It's called the Kentucky Derby. And in the Kentucky Derby and in all horse racing, it's a really kind of incredible thing. These huge beasts weighing 1,200 pounds. 1,200 pounds. The muscle is incredible. To watch them walk from one area to the other area and to watch them walk right in front of you and to see every muscle in their legs and these powerful animals, 1,200-pound animal, and you'll see walking beside them a little tiny 110-pound man whose job, or woman, whose job it is to take this horse around the track and control every movement that he makes. And you look at it and go, that little guy ain't got a shot. That little guy ain't got a shot to control this beast. He don't have a chance. But what do? They take a small bit, place it in the mouth of the horse, and this small bit controls the entire animal. He says, okay, that's the horse, the bit of horse. He says, or what about a rudder? The small rudder of a ship determines where the ship goes. This is the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower. It's one of the largest ships in our Navy. It is 1,092 feet long. It weighs 91,400 tons. It travels up to 30 knots. And it's controlled, all controlled by a rudder, 1/1000th the size of the entire ship. So where that ship goes, what that ship does, is all controlled by one person controlling one rudder who is very small in comparison to the entire ship. So he says, okay, consider the bit in the horse's mouth. Consider the rudder on the ship that kind of gives and determines the direction. He says, or consider a small spark. In 2016, there were some folks that were playing with matches up in the Smoky Mountains. And at least that's they've traced back this huge wildfire to begin. Just began with a couple fellas, couple kids with matches in the Smoky Mountains. And it was all said and done. 17,000 acres of land were burnt up. 14 people lost their life. 191 people were injured. 2,500 homes were damaged. And over $2 billion in damages had been wrecked on the Great Smoky Mountain area. It's been 5 years. And as we drove through Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge area this summer, we could still see the damage. We could still see the trail that was left in the wake of one small match and the damage that it done, the power that it had done. See, for some of us in the room, we recognize and we make in our heads a very strong correlation between the power of that spark and the damage that it can cause with the power of our words and the damage they can cause, because us too. We too in this room may have an experience where something has been said to you. Something's been said, something's been spoken to you or about you, but words have been directed in your general area about a specific thing or specific thing about you, something you've done or said, and you've allowed that word to wreak havoc on your life and to do serious damage to our hearts. And not only are we walking wounded because of the words that have been spoken to us, but I think if we're honest this morning, we'd also say that we've been the wounder at times as well. We've been the wounded for sure, but we've also been the wounder. It's been our words that wreaked the havoc. It's been our words that have done the damage. It's been our words that have left behind them damage for many who were to come behind us. The tongue is small but powerful. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 27 and 28 communicates this idea. When Solomon writes, a worthless man spreads evil, and his speech is like a scorching fire. A dishonest man spreads strife, and whispers separate close friends. Maybe you've been experiencing that at some point in your life where you've seen a man spread evil and his speech be like a scorching fire. Maybe you've been the recipient of the strife that comes from dishonesty. Or maybe you have a friendship that is no longer a friendship, and it was separated by a little bit of slander, a little bit of gossip takes place, and the relationship divides, all because of words that were spoken. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21 says this, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. This week I've gotten 2 phone calls of people from my past that have passed away this week. One was a former coach of mine. One was a man at a former church I used to serve in. And when I got the phone call for both of those individuals, the very first thing I thought of in my mind about both of those men was what a great encouragement they were in my life. The very first thing. From the 6th grade to the 12th grade, I had a coach who constantly, annoyingly, it was so often, spoke positive things into my life. Like, look, listen, you got me with the wrong dude, man. Like, I'm not that guy. You believe things about me far beyond I believe in myself. But he continuously spoke these things over my life. It's the power of words. The other one was a man who was at a church that I served at. And as a young guy in ministry who didn't know just kind of jumped into ministry in 22, 23 years old, believing God had called me there, but unsure of a lot of what to do or how to do it. I had one continually encouraging source in this man. And he just found ways to just figure out ways to encourage me, to encourage my wife, to encourage our family. I mean, even to this day, till we saw them last. In McDonald's, he just continually figuring out ways to encourage me. And I think, man, when that time comes, when somebody gets that phone call from me, when a player who used to play on a team I coach gets a phone call that old Coach Walton is no more, there's not going to be many guys who go, wow, now there goes a guy who was a source of encouragement in my life. Man, I wasted opportunities, I believe, to use words to bring life. We want to speak life to people by the words that we choose. And really, this text, James continually says words. And I think we often think of the words that come out of our mouth, and I think that's a right application. But I also want you to think just for today and the times in which we live, we can contextualize this just a little bit, that the words that we speak, but also the words that we text, like that's included in that too, right? The words that you text, the words that never come out of your mouth, but they come out of your thumbs. Right, they come out of your thumbs, and because it's easier to say harsh things when you text rather than face-to-face, we say harsh things over text. We say harsh things that we would never say face-to-face, but we say them with our thumbs, hiding behind our phones to try to deliver a message, not recognizing the damage that those messages can do. See, this damage can come out of your mouth, and it can come out of your thumbs. But the words you say and the words you type have potential to bring life or death to the people that you are speaking to. They have potential to bring life or death. Really quickly, just a kind of just general quick application on how to do this. If you got taking notes, and I hope you are, just write the word think down. T-H-I-N-K for those spelling impaired. Okay, T-H-I-N-K, and that T is kind of a grid to know: should we text it? Should we say it? Should we type it? Should we communicate it? And it says the T is it true? Is it true? What am I saying? Do I know it's true? So oftentimes we can hear what we think we might have said or someone might have said and what we might have heard and communicate that to someone else. Second, is it helpful? One, is it true? Number two, is it helpful? Number three, is it inspiring? Number four, is it necessary? Look, here's the deal. It doesn't mean that we don't say hard things to people, but it makes sure that when we're saying hard things to people, that we're saying hard things that need to be said and not things about the person, not things that are more than just about the issue or about the thing that needs to be addressed. And we can unnecessarily say things that don't need to be said. Again, we don't avoid hard conversations. We don't avoid things that need to be said, but we want to say the things that are necessary to say, and we want to say them in a kind way. There's a way that you can have confrontation, and you can do it in a way that is kind. There's a way that you can be confrontational about things that somebody may be doing, saying, or believing, and you can do it in a way that is kind to them. So when we communicate, we want to say, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Because our words have potential for great power. The second thing we want to recognize is our inability to control our words. The inability we have to control our words. James says in chapter 7, he says this: every kind of animal, bird, reptile, fish is tamed and has been tamed by humankind, but no one has ever tamed the tongue. Now just think about this when I read it. What kind of animals were they taming in James's day? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what animals, what were they taming? What did that look like? I mean, did they tame pets? Like, did they tame, like, did they have shows you could go to? Did they have a Shamu, right? Did they have a Shamu? Remember Shamu at SeaWorld? You could go and see Shamu jump and flip and do all of her tricks. People in the water swimming with Shamu because it's cool. Shamu's trained. Did they have circuses in James's day? Did Pastor James go to the circus and see dancing elephants up on their back legs doing their thing because they'd been tamed? Had James seen that? Had he been to the show that I went to at Busch Gardens where they had a bird on stage and a man holds up $20 and the bird leaves the stage, takes the $20 and goes back to the stage, and where can I get me one of those birds? Did James see that? I would say probably not. But he had seen animals be tamed, and he makes this connection. He says, look, we can tame animals, and we know about all that. He says, but listen, no man tames the tongue. See, we know the tongue is powerful, and that's kind of a warning, a cautionary warning to us all, and we think, okay, I need to be careful. But then he follows that with really bad news. He says, the tongue is powerful, and you can't control it. That's bad news. Man, you have the potential in your words to wreak havoc and destruction, and you can't control it. We have the inability to control our tongues, and we can try, but you won't be successful. You've tried to tame your tongue in different ways, haven't you? Maybe you were having you wanted to use better language, and so you put a rubber band on your wrist. And every time you say a word you shouldn't say, you take that rubber band and smack right there on your wrist. Right? I've seen people have rubber bands on their wrists. That's what they've tried. I've seen all other people that do swear jars. Right? Some people $0.25, $5. Some people like, you kidding me? $5? What do you think? I'm made of money? Well, no. Okay, but they got these jars, and every time you swear, you have to put money in the jar. Well, we're, like it or not, we're 2 months away from all of the Christmas and all that goes with it. And there's a movie that plays around Christmas time about Ralphie. And Ralphie uses bad language. They try to tame his tongue, and they do it just by sticking soap in there. And well, you can choose your method. You can choose soap, or you can choose a rubber band, or you can choose a swear jar. But a couple things you got to recognize that what James is talking about is far more than obscene language here. What Proverbs is talking about when he says the power of life and death is held in the tongue, it's far more than obscene language. What he's saying, and we can see in verse 8, he says, but no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. Your tongue is full of deadly poison. We have to recognize the power that comes with the words that you say. Man, tell you what, this is a lesson I'm learning as a dad. This is a lesson I'm learning as a dad, that the power of the words that we say and the way that we say them. Let me tell you, I want to be the kind of husband that when my wife hears my feet about to walk into the room, she doesn't get nervous about what I may say. I want to be the kind of dad that when my kids hear my feet coming up the stairs and they're in their room, they don't get nervous about what kind of venom I'm going to unleash on them now. I want to be the kind of friend that when my friend sees my number pop up on their phone, they don't get worried about what damage I'm going to do with the words that I say. I want to be the kind of Christian. I want to be the kind of coworker. I want to be this and all of these things where that I'm not allowing deadly poison to be unleashed by my words. And look what he says in verse 9. He says, with the tongue we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in God's likeness. Blessing and cursing come out of the same mouth, my brothers and sisters. This should not be. He says, look, here's what happens. We come into church and we bless God, we honor God, we worship God, and for 6.5 other days of the week, our tongue is not seeking to honor the Lord in any way, shape, or form. That for a couple hours on a Sunday, we get it right. But for 6.5 other days, we get it wrong. For 6.5 other days, we instead live our lives for our own agendas. We'll talk about that more in just a moment. Of what it looks like to say, hey, we want to live our lives consistently for the Lord. There's an old story about a young man whose dad was having trouble getting his lawnmower to start. And so the dad finally just gives up on the thing, goes out, buys him a new push mower. The son says, hey, Dad, can I have the old push mower? I'd like to try and sell it. Dad says, sure, go ahead. Takes the push mower, gets him a cardboard sign, writes mower for sale, goes down by the road, puts the sign by the mower, and sits right there and waits. Not long, a preacher comes walking down the road. He says, hey, son, I need a mower, and that mower's for sale. Does that mower start? He said, yes, it does. Can I give it a shot? He says, go ahead. So he reaches down and starts yanking the cord, pulling the cord, but could not get the engine to turn, and he just keeps on pulling, finally with sweat on his brow, and he says, buddy, he says, son, I don't think this mower works. He says, sir, he said, preacher, you got to cuss to get that mower to start. He said, that's what my dad does. He says, you got to cuss to get that mower to start. He says, son, he says, I'm a preacher. He says, I've been preaching for 18 years. I haven't cussed for 18 years. And he says, well, right in that, without missing a beat, the young boy looks up and he says, well, just keep pulling that string. It'll come back to you. See, here's the deal. Oftentimes, it's the circumstances of our life. It's the circumstances of our life that we say, hey, when we're in here and the circumstances is Sunday morning in church, then our mouths may say one thing, but when we step outside of these walls, are our mouths still about the mission of God wherever our bodies take them? Are our mouths still about the mission of God wherever our bodies take them? What he's saying, I believe in the text, is that in life, there is the potential for you to take the gift of words and turn them into a weapon. And see, here's the thing. When we talk about our tongue, we can all think back to things that we've said that we wish we wouldn't have. And we think about our tongue, we think about the inability to tame it. We all go, yeah, that's me. But see, in our inability to tame the tongue and the sin that comes out of our mouth, because of our inability to fix ourselves, points us back to a spiritual reality. In the same way that you cannot fix your tongue on your own, and you can't wash it out with soap enough, you can't have a swear jar enough, you can't have a rubber bands on your arm enough, you can't tame your tongue, is a reminder that you can't save yourself. That your salvation doesn't come through what you do and your ability to work or earn your favor and salvation before God, but salvation comes only through what God has accomplished for us. It's an inability to control our tongue that points us to an inability to save ourselves. And it leads us to our last thing. Recognize that your words are an indication of your heart. Look at verse 11. He says, does a spring water pour out sweet and bitter water from the same opening? Can a fig tree produce olives? My brothers and sisters, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a saltwater spring yield fresh water. You don't plant an apple tree and get mad when apples come out of it. You don't plant an apple tree and get mad when it produces apples, because apple trees produce apples. That's what they do. It would be strange, wouldn't it, for an apple tree to produce anything else other than apples. And what Paul's saying here is he's saying, look, it's about a heart issue. It's about a heart issue. Jesus tells us in a couple different places in the text, over in Mark. If we go back over to Mark chapter 7, verse 14, Jesus, summoning the crowd again, told them, listen to me, all of you who understand, nothing that goes into a person from the outside can defile him, but the things that come out of a person, they're what defile him. When he went up to the house away from the crowd, his disciples asked him about this parable, and they said, are you also lacking in understanding? Don't you realize that nothing going into a person from the outside can defile him? For if it can go from his heart, but into his stomach it is eliminated. Thus his declaration, all food is clean. And then he says, what comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of people's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adulteries, greed, evil action, deceit, self-indulgence, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All these things come from within that defile a person. And then another time over in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34, Jesus says, brood of vipers, how can you speak good things when you are evil? And then he says this, for the mouth speaks out of the overflow of the heart. See, when you say things that you wish you had not said, we don't stop and think, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to. What you ought to say is, oops, sorry, I said what I meant. or I just said what was already in me. See, if I take this bottle of water and I squeeze it, what comes out of the bottle of water? Water does, because water is what is within it. And in life, when we are squeezed by the circumstances of life, what comes out of us in that moment is what's already in us. And what James is trying to communicate, we cannot expect something different to come out than what's already within. And that oftentimes when we look at our words, instead of try harder, do better, we ought to look at our heart issue at the ground level and say the reality is not that my words are bad and I need to change my words. No, we recognize that our heart is bad and I need to change my heart. So if you're here today and you're not a believer and follower of Jesus, you're going, okay, Matt, then what is my next step? Your next step is you surrender your life to Jesus. You surrender your life to him. You understand that maybe today, when you kind of do an inventory of the words that you speak, you recognize what the Bible clearly says, that you're a sinner separated from God who cannot save themselves, but is in full need of the grace that God offers through his son, Jesus Christ. And that's where you sit today. If you're here today and you're a follower of Jesus, you're a believer in Jesus, you've said yes to following him, you say, okay, well, what's my next step? Here's my encouragement to you. It is to remember for a moment what Paul calls you. Paul calls you an ambassador of God. See, we are on earth, but we're here representing another. Paul Tripp says it this way: your words are always in pursuit of some kind of kingdom. You're either speaking as a mini king, seeking to establish your will in your relationships and your circumstances, or you're speaking as an ambassador, seeking to be a part of what the king is doing. When you speak, you are either speaking as a mini king, trying to establish your rule and your reign within your relationships, or you are speaking as an ambassador of the true king, recognizing that the purposes that God has for you on this earth are to be about his business. See, it's more about the words that you speak. We're not just saying, hey, speak biblical words. No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying live with a biblical agenda. Not just speak better words, but live with a better agenda. 2 questions, if you're a believer in the house this morning, I want you to consider. Number 1, what are the purposes of God on earth? What are the purposes of God on earth? Think about that question for a moment. What are God's purposes on earth? Question number 2, how do my words contribute to that purpose? What are God's purposes on earth? Question number 1, think of it. Number 2, how are my words being a part of or contributing to his purposes? Or if I do an inventory of my words, I recognize that my words really just support my purposes. That I'm just a mini king trying to live and rule with my kingdom rather than submit to the king entirely, all that I am, including my words, to his rule and reign. Let's pray together.